A stray bullet changed everything that April morning when the sun rose blood red over the plains. What happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, forgiveness, and second chances. If you like stories that tug at your heartstrings, hit that like button now and subscribe so you don't miss any detail of this emotional journey. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and broken promises when Elias McGraw dismounted his horse that suffocating afternoon. The plains stretched out endlessly before him, a golden canvas painted with brush strokes of cacti and stones that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. He was a man marked by time and guilt. His blue eyes, like the sky before a storm, carried the weight of 1,000 lost battles against himself. At 38, Elias lived like a wraith among the living, inhabiting an isolated ranch where silence had been his only companion since that fateful night 3 years prior, when his recklessness cost his younger brother his life during a botched robbery. Lone Stone Ranch stood like a monument to human solitude, its wooden walls creaking under the weight of its owner's emotional abandonment. It was early April when Clara Whitfield arrived in the small town of Dusthaven, bringing only a worn suitcase and the iron determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. She had answered a discreet ad in the local newspaper looking for someone to care for the house and property, but what she found was far more than she expected. Clara had green eyes that recalled the stubborn hope that sprouts even in the most arid desert, and her delicate hands hid the strength of someone who had faced storms worse than any plains tornado. Their first meeting was marked by the palpable tension that filled the air like electricity before lightning. Elias barely looked up when she knocked on the door, merely indicating with a dry gesture where the hired hand's quarters were, and muttering basic instructions about her responsibilities. Clara immediately sensed that this man carried invisible wounds deeper than any knife cut, and something in her chest tightened with a compassion she hadn't expected to feel. During the first few weeks, they danced a silent waltz of mutual avoidance, him leaving early to tend the cattle, and her immersing herself in the work of bringing life back to that house that seemed frozen in time. It was during a particularly violent storm at the end of April that the first moment of genuine connection occurred. The wind howled like hungry wolves around the house when Clara heard the sound of something breaking in the barn. Without a second thought, she ran outside, the rain lashing her face like icy needles. She found Elias struggling to contain the frightened horses, a deep cut on his forehead bleeding profusely. Without hesitation, she helped him calm the animals, her hands working in sync with his in a dance of survival. When they finally managed to quiet the horses, Elias looked at her truly for the first time, seeing not just a hired hand, but a woman of extraordinary courage. As she tended his wound in the kitchen, the gentle touch of her fingers on his skin created an invisible bridge between two lonely souls. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes. Elias started lingering longer during meals, no longer wolfing down his food in silence to make a quick escape. Clara noticed how he sometimes watched her work in the garden she had begun to cultivate, bringing life and color to the arid ground around the house. One May afternoon, as she planted sunflower seeds, Elias approached hesitantly and offered to help. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, his large, calloused hands beside hers, smaller but equally determined. When their hands accidentally brushed reaching for the same tool, both recoiled as if they had touched hot iron, but the blush on their faces told a different story. The second crucial moment of closeness came through a seemingly simple but meaningful gesture. Clara had noticed Elias kept an old harmonica in a living room drawer, covered in dust but obviously cherished. One evening after dinner, she quietly placed it on the table in front of him. Elias froze for long moments, painful memories flooding his mind. His brother used to ask him to play on cold nights, and since his death, Elias hadn't been able to even look at the instrument. Clara, sensing his internal struggle, simply said that some melodies were too sad to be played alone. But perhaps they could find new songs together. That night, for the first time in 3 years, the melancholic notes of the harmonica filled the air, and Clara softly hummed an old song about hope and redemption. The month of June brought not only the scorching summer heat but also shadows of the past neither of them expected to face. It all began when a group of riders arrived at the ranch on a particularly hot afternoon. The leader, a man named Jake Morrison, was an old associate of Elias's from the days when he and his brother lived outside the law. Morrison brought disturbing news about one last job that could earn enough money for everyone to retire, but Elias vehemently refused, declaring that life was behind him. The tension was palpable, like the heat rising from the ground, and Clara watched from the kitchen window, her heart constricted with a fear she couldn't name. Morrison didn't accept the refusal easily. Over the next few days, he and his men stayed in town, spreading rumors about Elias's past and creating an atmosphere of distrust. Clara started hearing whispers when she went to the market, sideways glances that followed her like shadows, but instead of pulling away, she drew even closer to Elias, demonstrating a loyalty that caught him completely off guard. One evening, while having coffee on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, she asked about his past. Elias, for the first time, opened his heart, telling her about the hard life they'd led, about the mistakes he'd made, and especially about the guilt he carried for his brother's death. The third significant moment in their growing relationship occurred when Clara shared her own story of pain. She had lost her husband and young son in an arson fire 2 years prior, fleeing west in hopes of escaping the memories that haunted her like ghosts. As tears silently rolled down her face under the starlight, Elias took her hand for the first time voluntarily. There were no words that could heal such deep wounds, but the warmth of that simple touch spoke of mutual understanding and the possibility of healing through human connection. They remained like that for hours, two wounded hearts finding comfort in each other as the night desert enveloped them in its silent embrace. The first major turning point arrived like a bolt from the blue one July morning. Clara had gone into town to fetch supplies when she heard gunshots echoing down the main street. Morrison and his men had robbed the bank, and in the ensuing confusion, the sheriff had been gravely wounded. To Clara's horror, she heard Morrison yell that Elias McGraw would be next if he didn't join them. Racing back to the ranch, her heart pounding like 1,000 wild horses' hooves, she found Elias preparing to face his past once and for all. The determination in his eyes was like steel forged in fire, but underneath she could see fear not of death, but of losing her. The confrontation that followed tested not only Elias's courage, but also revealed Clara's extraordinary strength. When Morrison and his men surrounded the ranch at dusk, demanding Elias join them or face the consequences, it was Clara who grabbed a rifle and stood by his side. The image of her, golden hair shining under the setting sun, green eyes blazing with determination, was forever etched in Elias's memory. Together they faced the outlaws, not with unrestrained violence, but with the cunning of those who had something precious to protect. Clara had set traps around the property, using her knowledge of chemistry from the time she'd helped her late pharmacist husband, creating smoke bombs that confused the attackers. During the ensuing shootout, a moment of pure terror froze Elias's blood when he saw Clara get grazed on the arm. The fury that seized him was like a wild animal released from its cage. With a precision born of desperation and love, he managed to disarm Morrison and his men, forcing them to retreat. But it was Clara's passionate speech to the townspeople who had arrived, drawn by the gunshots, that truly turned the tide. She spoke of redemption, of the possibility of change, of how Elias had chosen a different path and deserved the chance to live it. Her words, laden with conviction and love, touched even the hardest hearts. The fourth crucial moment in their blossoming, romance came during Clara's recovery from her injury. Elias cared for her with a tenderness that surprised them both, his large, rough hands becoming instruments of care and affection. As he changed her bandages, he confessed in a low voice that the fear of losing her had been greater than any terror he'd ever faced. Clara, touched by the vulnerability in his voice, pulled him close and kissed him for the first time. It was a soft, hesitant kiss, laden with unspoken promises and cautious hopes. The taste of salt and hope on her lips was like cool water in the desert, and both knew there was no going back from that moment. The following weeks brought a cautious peace, but also new challenges. The drought plaguing the region intensified, turning the land to dust and hearts to stone. The wells began to dry up, and tension in the community grew like weeds. Elias and Clara worked tirelessly to keep the ranch running, but it was clear they would need creative solutions to survive. It was then that Clara had an idea that would change not just their lives, but the entire community. She remembered irrigation techniques she had read about in old books, methods used in arid lands on other continents. With the reluctant but growing help of their neighbors, they began building a system for rainwater, harvesting, and drip irrigation. The irrigation project united the community in unexpected and profound ways. The first attempts were disastrous. Poorly planned channels that dried up before water reached the fields, cisterns that cracked under the relentless sun. But every failure was a lesson, and Clara kept meticulous records of each experiment. She discovered that mixing local clay with cactus fibers created a natural sealant that prevented leaks. Elias contributed his practical knowledge of the terrain, identifying the lowest points where water would naturally collect during the rare rains. The initially skeptical neighbors began to take notice when they saw the first green shoots emerging from the previously barren soil. James Patterson, a gruff rancher who had lost half his herd to the drought, was the first to offer help. He brought his sons, strong young men who dug channels under the scorching sun. Soon, Mary Sullivan, the widow who managed the neighboring property alone, joined in with her daughters. The women wove shade cloths to protect the most delicate seedlings, while sharing stories and laughter that hadn't been heard on those desolate lands in a long time. The work was brutal. Their hands bled, their backs ached, and there were days when it felt like they were trying to tame the desert itself with their bare hands. But something magical happened during those long afternoons of shared labor. Men who had previously eyed Elias with suspicion because of his dark past now saw him sweating alongside them, sharing water from his own canteen when supplies ran low. They witnessed his patience in teaching building techniques, his willingness to take on the toughest tasks, and most importantly, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about the future they were building together. Clara became the heart of the project. She organized community meals where everyone shared the little they had, transforming scarcity into abundance through generosity. Her hands, previously accustomed only to household chores, learned to handle heavy tools, calculate angles of inclination for the channels, and identify the subtle signs the desert gave about where to find water. She became a respected figure, her intelligence and compassion winning over even the most skeptical. The women of the community, initially distant, began seeking her out for advice on everything from home remedies to marital troubles. During this period, a new character entered their lives. A young Mexican orphan named Rosa who had fled a cruel orphanage. Clara convinced Elias to take her in, and soon the girl became like a daughter to them both, filling the ranch with laughter that hadn't been heard there in a long time. The second major turning point arrived when they discovered Morrison had survived and was planning revenge. He had allied himself with a corrupt landowner who coveted the fertile land the new irrigation system had created. Forged documents appeared, claiming Elias's property was on disputed land. The ensuing legal battle tested not only their financial resources, but also their faith in each other. There were moments when despair threatened to swallow them like quicksand, but they leaned on each other, finding strength in their unity. The climax of this new crisis came during a crucial hearing in August. Clara had spent sleepless nights researching laws and precedents, and her presentation in the makeshift courtroom was nothing short of brilliant. But it was when Rosa, the little orphan they had taken in, testified about the loving home she had found on the ranch, that hearts were moved. The community, seeing the transformation love had wrought in Elias and the good he and Clara had brought to everyone, rallied in their support. The judge, a fair man who had known Elias's brother, ruled in their favor, but not without warning that Morrison was still at large and thirsty for revenge. The fifth and most significant moment in their blossoming relationship came on a starry September night. Elias had prepared a special dinner, with Rosa's clumsy but enthusiastic help. Under the vast desert sky, with millions of stars as silent witnesses, he knelt before Clara, There was no diamond ring, just a simple band made of silver mined from the nearby mountains engraved with the words, "Eternal Hope." His proposal was simple and direct. Like himself, she had cleaned not just his house but his soul, showing him that redemption was possible and that love could flourish even in the most arid soil. Clara, with tears shining like diamonds under the starlight, said yes not just to him, but to the life they had built together. The wedding was set for October, but fate had other plans. Morrison, consumed by his obsession for revenge, planned his final attack. He kidnapped Rosa while she was picking flowers for the wedding, leaving a note demanding Elias meet him alone in the canyon known as Devil's Throat. The terror that seized Clara and Elias was like a sandstorm that blinds and suffocates. But instead of yielding to despair, they planned carefully. Clara refused to let Elias go alone, arguing that they had faced everything together so far, and this time would be no different. The final confrontation in the canyon was a moment of supreme truth. The location Morrison chose wasn't accidental. Devil's Throat was a place of dark legends, where it was said the spirits of the dead danced at noon and the echo could drive a man mad. The red rock walls rose like bloody sentinels against the relentless blue sky, and the heat created mirages that distorted reality. Morrison, driven mad by the hatred and envy that gnawed at him like acid, had prepared an elaborate ambush. He knew every rock, every shadow of that cursed place, and had positioned his few remaining allies at strategic points. The air was thick with tension when Elias and Clara arrived, the sound of their horses echoing ominously through the canyon walls. They had left word with the sheriff, but knew help would be slow to arrive. Rosa was tied to a high ledge, her small body trembling not just from fear, but from absolute faith that her adoptive parents would save her. Morrison emerged from the shadows like an apparition from hell itself, his face marked by scars and his eyes burning with madness. He hadn't counted on the iron determination of parents protecting their adoptive daughter, nor on the transformation love had wrought in Elias McGraw. The battle that followed was brutal and decisive. The first shot came from Morrison, ricocheting off the rocks and sending sharp fragments through the air. Elias pushed Clara behind a rock as he returned fire, every movement calculated with the precision of someone who couldn't afford to waste ammunition. Clara, for her part, didn't remain passive. Using small mirrors she had brought, she created confusing reflections of the sun that temporarily blinded the enemy shooters. Elias fought with the ferocity of a man who had everything to lose, each of his shots finding its mark with deadly precision, while Clara used her wits to dismantle Morrison's traps, identifying and neutralizing the strategically placed powder. Kigs. The fighting seemed to last for hours, though it probably only spanned minutes. Sweat streamed like rivers down the faces of everyone involved, mixing with blood and dust. One of Morrison's henchmen tried to flank Elias, but Clara brought him down with a well-aimed shot from her small derringer. At the crucial moment, when ammunition was running low, and Morrison had Elias in his sights, the world seemed to freeze. Morrison yelled about revenge, about justice, about how Elias had ruined everything by choosing the path of redemption. It was then that Rosa, that extraordinary child who had learned courage from her new parents, showed bravery beyond her years. With a sharp cry that echoed through the canyon like an eagle's scream, she managed to partially free herself from her bonds and threw rocks at Morrison, distracting the outlaw long enough for Clara to approach from behind and disarm him with a precise rifle butt strike. The outcome was swift and definitive. Morrison, trying to flee, fell into the very precipice he intended to use against Elias. As they rescued him, gravely wounded but alive, something changed in his eyes. Seeing the love and unity of the makeshift family before him, the madness that consumed him seemed to dissipate like smoke in the wind. His last words before losing consciousness were a plea for forgiveness, which Elias, after a long moment of internal struggle, granted. The wedding finally took place on a golden October morning, with the entire community present to celebrate not just the union of two souls, but the triumph of hope over despair. Clara wore a simple white cotton dress, but in Elias's eyes she shone brighter than any star. Rosa scattered desert flower petals down the aisle, her crystalline laughter filling the air like celestial music. The preacher, emotional, spoke about how true love is like water in the desert, rare and precious, capable of working miracles where before there was only desolation. The celebration that followed was a celebration of life in all its forms. Elias's harmonica played cheerful melodies for the first time in years, accompanied by a neighbor's fiddle and another's guitar. Clara danced until her feet ached, her contagious laughter spreading joy like the wind spread seeds. Rosa, officially adopted by the couple that same day, fell asleep in her new mother's arms, finally safe and loved. The following months brought a peace none of them had dared to dream of. The ranch prospered under their combined care, becoming a model for other properties in the region. The irrigation system they had developed saved many families from ruin during the prolonged drought. Elias found purpose in teaching the young people of the region about cattle, ranching, and sustainable farming, while Clara opened a small school where Rosa and other children could learn not just reading and writing, but also about hope and perseverance. Morrison survived his injuries and was tried for his crimes. Surprisingly, Elias and Clara testified on his behalf, asking for clemency. The broken man who emerged from prison years later dedicated the rest of his life to helping others find the path to redemption, inspired by the example of the couple who had every reason to hate him, but chose forgiveness. The true magic of Elias and Clara's story wasn't in the dramatic moments of danger and salvation, but in the small daily gestures of love and care. In the way he always left a hot cup of coffee for her before heading out to work. In the way she always saved the best portion of food for him, even when supplies were scarce. In the pride in his eyes when Rosa read her first words aloud. In the night spent on the porch, watching the stars and planning the future with renewed hope. Lone Stone Ranch had been completely transformed. Where before there had only been silence and desolation, now laughter and songs echoed. Clara's garden flourished magnificently, with sunflowers that stood tall and proud under the desert sun, their golden faces always turned toward the light. It was a perfect metaphor for their own lives, which had learned to seek the light even in the darkest moments. Years later, when white hair began to appear at Elias's temples and small smile lines marked Clara's face, they still looked at each other with the same wonder as that first stormy night. Rosa grew to become a strong and compassionate young woman, carrying with her the lessons of love and resilience she had learned from her adoptive parents. She became a teacher, spreading knowledge and hope throughout the territory. The community of Dusthaven prospered, transforming from a dusty outpost into a thriving town. In the center of the town square, they built a community well, decorated, with a plaque that read, "The water of life flows most abundantly when shared." It was a tribute to the couple who had shown that even in the most arid desert, love could bring forth springs of hope. Elias never forgot his brother, but the guilt that had once consumed him transformed into a determination to honor his memory. By living a worthy life, he established a fund to help troubled youth find honest work, breaking the cycle of violence and despair that had claimed so many lives. Clara supported every initiative, her wisdom and compassion guiding their decisions. The seasons passed like pages from a well-lived book. Springs brought rare but precious rains they had learned to capture and preserve. Scorching summers tested their resilience, but also strengthened their bonds. Autumns painted the desert with surprising colors, reminding them that beauty could be found in the most unexpected places. Cold winters gathered them around the fireplace, where stories were shared and memories were forged. Elias and Clara's legacy extended far beyond their own lives. They proved that redemption isn't a destination, but a daily journey of right choices. That true love isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of a mutual commitment to face storms together. That a heart hardened by pain can be softened by the gentle touch of compassion. On a particularly memorable afternoon, as the sun set once more over the endless plains, Elias picked up his old harmonica and played a melody he had composed for Clara. The notes floated on the air like golden butterflies, carrying with them the entire journey they had traveled together. Clara, sitting beside him with her head resting on his shoulder, smiled, knowing they had found something many search. A lifetime for but few find, a home in each other's hearts. Their story became a legend in the Old West, told around campfires and in dusty saloons. But to those who knew them, Elias and Clara were simply living proof that even in the most unlikely circumstances, love finds a way. Like the underground waters that flow unseen beneath the desert, waiting only for the right opportunity to emerge and transform the arid land into an oasis of life. And so, on the golden plains where the wind still whispers old stories, Lone Stone Ranch remains a testament that no soul is beyond redemption, no heart too lonely to love again. The seeds of hope Clara planted in that first garden had multiplied 1,000-fold, creating a legacy of love that would outlive them both for generations. When it finally came time to leave this life, they departed as they had lived their best years together, hand in hand with hearts full of gratitude for the unlikely miracle of having found each other. Rosa and her children continued their work, ensuring that the light they had kindled in the desert would never fade. And you, when will you let hope bloom in your desert?